When Clara Whitmore walked into that dusty circus tent with her life savings clutched in her trembling hands, she had no idea she was about to buy more than just a man's freedom. She looked the cruel ringmaster straight in the eye and declared she would pay whatever price he demanded for the broken soul chained in that cage. What happened in the months that followed would transform not just two shattered hearts, but an entire frontier community that had forgotten what mercy looked like. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The autumn wind carried the scent of dust and desperation through the streets of Deadwood as Clara Whitmore pressed her shawl tighter around her shoulders. From her kitchen window, she could see the colorful banners and painted wagons of Morrison's Grand Traveling Circus setting up in the empty lot behind Brennan's General Store. It had been 2 years since she'd last ventured into town for anything beyond selling eggs and buying necessities, but something about the commotion stirred a curiosity she thought had died with her husband. Thomas had loved circuses. She remembered how his eyes would light up whenever traveling performers came through their old hometown in Missouri. "Come on, Clara," he'd say, taking her hand. "Let's go see what wonders they've brought us today." But Thomas lay buried in the small cemetery on the hill now, victim of a mining accident that had claimed 3 good men and left their wives to fend for themselves in this harsh territory. Clara gathered her basket of eggs, fresh from her small flock of hens, and steeled herself for the walk into town. The September sun beat down mercilessly as she made her way along the dusty road, her worn boots kicking up small clouds with each step. Deadwood bustled with unusual activity. Children pressed their faces against shop windows, pointing at the circus posters, while men gathered outside the saloon, debating whether such frivolity was appropriate for a God-fearing community. She completed her business at Miller's grocery, accepting the usual handful of coins for her eggs with a polite nod. The grocer's wife, Mrs. Patterson, barely acknowledged her presence, a reminder that widowhood in this place often meant invisibility. Clara was preparing to return to her lonely ranch when she heard the ringmaster's booming voice echoing from the circus grounds. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, prepare yourselves for the most astounding, the most terrifying creature ever captured in the wilds of the Dakota Territory." Despite herself, Clara found her feet carrying her toward the crowd that had gathered around a large wooden cage draped with tattered canvas. The ringmaster, a portly man with an elaborate mustache and gaudy vest, gestured dramatically as he worked the growing audience into a frenzy. "Behold," he cried, whipping away the canvas with theatrical flair, "the savage beast man of the mountains." Clara's hand flew to her mouth in horror. Inside the cage, chained hand and foot, sat a man of perhaps 30 years. His dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face marked by exhaustion and despair. His clothes were little more than rags, and his bare feet were caked with dirt and dried blood. But it was his eyes that struck Clara like a physical blow, eyes that held not wildness, but a profound, aching sadness that spoke to her own lonely heart. The crowd jeered and pointed, some throwing bits of food at the caged man, while children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Clara watched in growing revulsion as the ringmaster prodded the prisoner with a long stick, trying to provoke some reaction for the entertainment of the mob. That's when she saw it, a single tear sliding down the man's dirt-stained cheek as his gaze met hers through the bars. In that moment, Clara Whitmore saw not a savage beast, but a fellow human being stripped of dignity and hope. The realization hit her like a lightning strike. She couldn't simply walk away and pretend she hadn't witnessed this cruelty. Something deep in her soul, something she thought had died with Thomas, suddenly blazed back to life. Clara couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those haunted eyes staring back at her through the iron bars. She paced her small kitchen until dawn, the floorboards creaking under her restless steps, her mind wrestling with thoughts she couldn't push away. By morning, she had made her decision. She walked into the First National Bank of Deadwood with purpose she hadn't felt in 2 years. The bank clerk, a nervous young man named Philip, looked surprised to see her. "Mrs. Whitmore, how may I help you today?" "I need to withdraw $200, Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Philip's eyebrows shot up. "Ma'am, that's nearly your entire savings account. Might I ask what for?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "That's my business, Mr. Phillips." The young man shuffled through his papers, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitmore, with winter coming, perhaps you should reconsider. That money is all you have to see you through the cold months." "I understand the risks," Clara replied. "Please prepare the withdrawal." 20 minutes later, she stood outside Morrison's wagon, the envelope containing her life savings tucked securely in her coat pocket. The ringmaster was counting coins from the previous night's show when she approached. "Well, well," Morrison said, looking her up and down with calculating eyes. if it isn't another curious spectator. Sorry, madam, but the show doesn't start again until this evening. I'm not here for the show, Clara said. I'm here about the man in the cage. Morrison's expression shifted to one of shrewd interest. Ah, you're interested in our prize attraction, are you? Magnificent specimen, isn't he? Caught him myself in the Black Hills, living wild as an animal. Clara's stomach churned at the obvious lie, but she kept her voice level. I want to buy him. The ringmaster's eyes widened, then narrowed as he sensed opportunity. Buy him? My dear woman, he's not for sale. He's the centerpiece of my show, worth his weight in gold. Everything has a price, Mr. Morrison, Clara said, pulling out the envelope. Name yours. Morrison's gaze fixed on the money like a hawk spotting prey. After a moment of calculation, he smiled. $200 cash right now. The amount was exactly what Clara had brought, her entire life savings, every penny she had managed to scrape together since Thomas's death. It would leave her with nothing for the harsh Dakota winter that was only weeks away. Deal, she said without hesitation. Morrison's eyes gleamed as he snatched the envelope and quickly counted the bills. Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Whitmore, and I want him released immediately. Of course, Morrison called to his assistants. Boys, remove the chains from our former attraction. The lady has made a purchase. Clara watched as the circus hands unlocked the heavy shackles from the man's wrists and ankles. He looked up at her with confusion and disbelief, as if unable to comprehend what was happening. When the cage door swung open, he stumbled out on unsteady legs, nearly collapsing from weakness. Easy there, Clara said softly, reaching out to steady him. He flinched at her touch but didn't pull away. Ma'am, he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. Why did you do this? Clara looked into those haunted eyes and saw a flicker of something she recognized, the desperate hope of someone who had lost everything. Because, she said simply, everyone deserves a chance to be free. As they walked away from the circus grounds together, Clara couldn't help but wonder what she had just set in motion. Behind them, she could hear Morrison already concocting a new story for the crowd about his escaped savage, but she didn't care. All that mattered was the broken man walking beside her, and the strange certainty that saving him might somehow save herself as well. Tentar novamente e mi pode, fazendo. A história toda até o capítulo 2. Editar planejou continuar a história até o capítulo 12 com cuidado. Is the user wants me to continue the story all the way through chapter 12. I need to follow the detailed synopsis provided and create a complete narrative following the structure. Let me continue from where I left off with chapter 2, moving through all chapters to reach the satisfying conclusion in chapter 12. I need to maintain. The walk to Clara's ranch took nearly an hour, and with each step, the man beside her seemed to grow more suspicious of her motives. She noticed how he kept glancing around as if expecting a trap, his shoulders tense despite his obvious exhaustion. What's your name? Clara asked gently as they reached the gate to her small property. Ezra, he replied after a long pause. Ezra Sullivan. Clara unlatched the gate and gestured toward her modest ranch house. Well, Mr. Sullivan, you're welcome to rest here as long as you need. Ezra stopped walking and stared at her. Ma'am, I don't understand what's happening here. Nobody does something like this without wanting something in return. Clara turned to face him, noting the way he kept his distance, ready to run if necessary. You're right to be cautious, Mr. Sullivan, but the only thing I want is to see you get back on your feet. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Clara looked at this broken man and saw herself 2 years ago, lost, alone, and certain that kindness no longer existed in the world, because someone should have done the same for me when I needed it most. She led him to the small barn behind her house, where she had prepared a clean stall with fresh hay and blankets. You can stay here tonight. There's a pump outside for washing, and I'll bring you some food. When Clara returned with a plate of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, she found Ezra sitting on the hay bale, staring at his hands. Up close, she could see the angry red marks where the shackles had rubbed his wrists raw. Mr. Sullivan, she said, setting the plate down carefully, would you mind telling me how you ended up with that circus? Ezra's jaw tightened. My own family sold me to them. The simple statement hit Clara like a physical blow. Your family. My father's a drunk who owes money to every gambling hall from here to Chicago, Ezra said bitterly. When the debts got too high, they needed a way out. Told Morrison I was dangerous, that I'd gone mad with grief after... His voice broke. After what? Clara asked softly. After my wife died. Ezra looked up at her with eyes full of old pain. Sarah was killed when bandits raided our town. I was the school teacher there. Thought I could protect everyone. Instead, I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Clara felt her heart clench. She knew that particular agony intimately, I'm sorry for your loss. After Sarah died, I started drinking, getting into fights. Made it easy for my family to convince people I was unstable. Ezra's voice grew bitter. Morrison paid them $200, exactly what they needed to clear my father's debts. $200, Clara repeated quietly, the same amount she had just paid to free him. You shouldn't have wasted your money on me, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm not worth saving. Clara set down her own grief for a moment and looked at this educated man who had been reduced to believing he was worthless. That's not for you to decide, Mr. Sullivan. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before Clara stood to leave. Get some rest. Tomorrow, if you're feeling stronger, perhaps you could help me with some repairs around the ranch. I'll pay you fair wages. Ezra looked up sharply. You'd trust me to work for you. I'd trust you to do right by someone who gave you a second chance, Clara replied. As she walked back to the house, Clara heard something that made her pause, the sound of quiet sobbing coming from the barn. Through the partially open door, she saw Ezra with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking as he whispered a name over and over. Sarah, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Clara closed her eyes and felt tears of her own threatening to fall. Tomorrow she would have to face the consequences of her impulsive decision. She had no money left for winter supplies, and she had just taken in a man she knew nothing about, except that his own family had betrayed him. But listening to Ezra's broken whispers in the darkness, Clara knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes saving someone else was the only way to save yourself. Word of Clara's purchase spread through Deadwood faster than wildfire in dry grass. By the time she arrived in town 3 days later to buy supplies on credit, she could feel every eye following her movement down Main Street. Clara Whitmore's lost her mind, she heard Mrs. Patterson whisper to another woman outside the church. Bringing that savage to live on her property. Mark my words, she'll be found murdered in her bed before the week's out. At Brennan's General Store, the owner himself emerged from behind the counter with a ledger in his hands and concern etched on his weathered face. Mrs. Whitmore, Silas Brennan said, his voice carrying the tone of a man delivering bad news. I'm afraid I can't extend you any more credit. Clara felt her stomach drop. Mr. Brennan, I've never missed a payment. That was before you took in that creature, Brennan replied, avoiding her eyes. Folks are concerned about your judgment, and frankly, so am I. What kind of decent woman brings a wild man to live on her property? The kind who believes in Christian charity, Clara said, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. Christian charity doesn't extend to dangerous lunatics, Brennan snapped. Now I suggest you get rid of him before something terrible happens. Clara was about to respond when a new voice cut through the tension. Seems to me a man's character should be judged by his actions, not his circumstances. Everyone turned to see Martha Collins, the owner of the Silver Dollar Saloon, standing in the doorway. Martha was a formidable woman in her 40s who had earned respect through sheer determination and a reputation for fairness in a town where both were rare commodities. Martha, this doesn't concern you, Brennan said dismissively. It concerns me when I see good people being mistreated, Martha replied, stepping into the store. Mrs. Whitmore has done nothing but show kindness to someone in need. That used to be considered a virtue in these parts. That man is dangerous, Mrs. Patterson interjected from the doorway. The Reverend says a lot of things, Martha interrupted, but last I checked, judging others was supposed to be God's job, not ours. Clara felt a rush of gratitude toward this unexpected ally. Thank you, Martha, but I can handle this myself. I'm sure you can, Martha said with a smile, but that doesn't mean you should have to. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Thompson, a young physician who had moved to Deadwood only 6 months earlier. He tipped his hat to the ladies and nodded to Brennan. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, I heard about your house guest. If he needs medical attention, please don't hesitate to bring him by. I don't turn away patients based on gossip. Thank you. Doctor, Clara said, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. This is ridiculous, Brennan muttered. Mark my words, that man will bring nothing but trouble. As if summoned by his words, the door opened again, and Sheriff Jenkins stepped inside. Clara's heart sank. Jenkins was known to be more politician than lawman, always siding with whoever held the most influence in town. Mrs. Whitmore, Jenkins said, touching the brim of his hat, I need to have a word with you about your situation. What situation would that be, Sheriff? Well, ma'am, there have been some complaints. Folks are worried about having a dangerous individual living so close to town. Has this individual committed any crime? Dr. Thompson asked pointedly. Well, no, but then what exactly is the issue? Martha added. Sheriff Jenkins looked uncomfortable. The issue is public safety. Now, Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not saying you need to get rid of him immediately. but perhaps you could keep him confined to your property for everyone's peace of mind. Clara felt her temper flare. Confined? He's not an animal, Sheriff. He's a human being who deserves to be treated as such. A human being who was living in a cage just a week ago, Brennan reminded everyone. Because his own family put him there, Clara shot back. Not because he belonged there. The argument was heating up when the store's bell chimed once more. This time it was Ezra himself who stepped through the doorway, and Clara's heart nearly stopped. He had cleaned himself up considerably. His hair was washed and trimmed, his face shaved, and he wore some of Thomas's old clothes that Clara had given him. But more than his appearance, it was his demeanor that surprised everyone. He stood straight with quiet dignity, and when he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable cadence of an educated man. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said politely, "I apologize for interrupting, but you forgot this at the ranch." He held out her marketing basket with a slight smile. "Thought you might need it." The room fell silent. This was not the savage beast everyone had expected. This was clearly a gentleman who had fallen on hard times. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," Clara said, accepting the basket and noting how his simple act of courtesy had shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. Sheriff Jenkins cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I suppose as long as there's no trouble, there won't be any trouble from me, Sheriff," Ezra said calmly. "I'm just grateful to Mrs. Whitmore for her kindness, and I intend to repay it through honest work." As they left the store together, Clara could hear the buzz of confused conversation behind them. For the first time since bringing Ezra home, she felt a spark of hope that perhaps the town might come to see him as she did, not as a dangerous savage, but as a man deserving of a second chance. But that hope was tempered by the knowledge that some people, like Silas Brennan, had their own reasons for wanting Ezra gone. And those reasons had nothing to do with public safety, and everything to do with the small ranch that Clara called home. Chapter 5. Over the following weeks, Ezra proved himself to be everything Clara had hoped, and more. His educated background became evident in countless small ways. The careful penmanship, when he helped her update her ranch records, the thoughtful questions he asked about improving crop rotation, and the gentle patience he showed when teaching her how to read the complex legal documents that Thomas had always handled. "You were really a school teacher," Clara observed one evening as they worked together to repair a section of damaged fence. The autumn air was crisp, and their breath formed small clouds as they spoke. "For 6 years," Ezra confirmed, steadying a fence post while Clara hammered. "I loved it. There's something magical about watching a child's face light up when they finally understand a difficult concept." "Do you miss it?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment. "I miss the person I was when I was teaching. Sarah used to say I came alive in front of a classroom." His voice softened. "She was the school teacher in the next town over. We met at a teachers' conference in Rapid City." Clara had learned not to push when Ezra spoke of his late wife, but she treasured these glimpses into the man he had been before grief and betrayal had nearly destroyed him. "What would you teach the children here if you could?" she asked. Ezra's eyes lit up with the first genuine enthusiasm she had seen from him. "Everything. Mathematics, literature, geography, history. Most of these children have never seen a map of the world, Clara. They don't know that there are cities with libraries containing thousands of books, or that there are mountains taller than anything in Dakota Territory. Maybe someday you could," Clara said softly. "Maybe," Ezra agreed, but Clara could hear the doubt in his voice. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Clara felt Ezra tense beside her as they both recognized Sheriff Jenkins riding up with 2 other men she didn't know. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jenkins called out, dismounting with official pomposity. "We need to have that talk we discussed." "What talk would that be, Sheriff?" Clara asked, though her heart was already sinking. "About your arrangement here." Jenkins gestured toward Ezra with barely disguised distaste. "There have been more complaints. Serious ones." "What kind of complaints?" One of the men with Jenkins stepped forward. Clara recognized him as Walter Hendricks, one of Brennan's frequent drinking companions. "My daughter saw him yesterday when she was picking berries near your property line. She came home crying, saying the wild man had stared at her." Ezra straightened. "I was mending the fence along that section. I saw the child and nodded politely, as any decent person would. If that frightened her, I apologize, but I certainly meant no harm." "See, that's the problem," Jenkins said. "Folks don't know what to make of you. One day you're a caged savage. The next you're talking like some college professor. It makes people nervous." "Since when is education a crime?" Clara demanded. "It's not about education, ma'am," the third man spoke up. Clara didn't recognize him, but his clothes marked him as someone with money. "It's about trust. How do we know this man won't revert to his savage ways? How do we know he's not just biding his time?" "Because I give you my word," Ezra said quietly. And because Mrs. Whitmore has shown me more kindness in these past weeks than my own family showed me in 30 years, I would die before I'd bring harm to her or anyone else in this community." The stranger laughed coldly. "The word of a man who was literally sold by his own kin? Forgive me if that doesn't carry much weight." Clara felt her temper flare. "And who exactly are you to question anyone's character?" "Name's Patrick Sullivan," the man said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And I'm this man's brother." The words hit like a physical blow. Clara saw Ezra go pale, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Patrick," Ezra breathed, "what are you doing here?" "Looking out for family interests," Patrick replied smoothly. "When we heard you'd been liberated, we thought it best to come collect you, take you home where you belong." "I am home," Ezra said firmly. "This is where I belong now." Patrick's expression hardened. "That's not your choice to make, little brother. You're not well. You haven't been since Sarah died. The family thinks it's time you came back where we can take proper care of you." "The same family that sold me to a circus?" Ezra's voice was rising now, anger overriding his usual calm demeanor. "Now, Ezra, that was a misunderstanding." "It was no misunderstanding," Ezra exploded. "You took money to have me locked in a cage and displayed like an animal." Sheriff Jenkins held up his hands. "Now, gentlemen, let's keep this civil." "There's nothing civil about what they did to him," Clara said fiercely. "And there's nothing civil about you coming here trying to take him away from a life he's chosen for himself." Patrick looked at Clara with calculating eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it? I can see my brother has charmed you, but you don't understand his condition. He's not stable, he's dangerous." "The only dangerous thing here is your lies," Clara shot back. "Are they lies?" Patrick reached into his coat and pulled out some official-looking papers. "These are medical documents from the physician who examined Ezra after Sarah's death. They clearly state that he's mentally unfit to make decisions for himself." Ezra grabbed for the papers, but Patrick pulled them away. "Those are falsified. Dr. Morrison was paid to write whatever you wanted." "That's a serious accusation," Sheriff Jenkins said, though Clara noticed he didn't sound particularly surprised. "Give me 24 hours, Patrick said, folding the papers and putting them away. "If Ezra doesn't come home voluntarily by tomorrow evening, I'll be back with a court order and federal marshals. This is Dakota territory, not some lawless frontier. There are procedures for dealing with the mentally incompetent." As the three men mounted their horses and rode away, Clara felt her world tilting dangerously. She looked at Ezra, who stood frozen, staring after his brother with an expression of such profound betrayal that it broke her heart. "Ezra," she said softly, touching his arm. "He'll do it," Ezra said hollowly. "Patrick always gets what he wants, and what he wants is to make sure I can never tell anyone what really happened to Sarah's town." "What do you mean?" Ezra turned to her, and Clara saw a darkness in his eyes she had never seen before. "My family wasn't just trying to get rid of a drunken embarrassment, Clara. They were trying to silence a witness." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her kitchen while Ezra sat at her table, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. The weight of his unfinished revelation hung between them like a storm cloud. "Tell me," Clara said finally, settling into the chair across from him. "Tell me what really happened." Ezra was quiet for so long that Clara began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The town where Sarah and I taught, it wasn't attacked by random bandits. The raid was organized, planned. They knew exactly which buildings to hit, which families had money, where the safe was kept in the bank." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. How could they know all that? Because someone told them. Ezra's hands clenched around the coffee cup. "Someone who had been there before, who had studied the town's layout and defenses." "Your family?" "Patrick and my older brother Michael had been through Sarah's town several times in the months before the attack. They claimed to be looking for work, but I found out later they were mapping the place for a gang of outlaws they'd gotten involved with." Clara's breath caught. "Do you have proof of this?" "I had proof," Ezra said bitterly. "Letters, maps in Patrick's handwriting, even witness statements from people who saw him meeting with known criminals. I was gathering everything together to take to the territorial marshal when your family had you committed, when they had me declared insane and sold to the circus." "Yes." Ezra finally looked up at her. "Sarah died because of my family's greed, Clara, and they made sure I couldn't tell anyone about it." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. "But you can tell someone now. You can tell me, and together we can—" "Together." Ezra pulled his hand away gently. "Clara, I can't ask you to get involved in this. Patrick isn't just going to take no for an answer. If I stay here, I'll bring danger to your door." "Then don't stay here," Clara said impulsively. "Come with me. We'll go to the territorial capital, find a marshal who can't be bought, tell them everything." Ezra stared at her in amazement. "You would do that? Leave your home, your life, for someone you barely know?" Clara felt her cheeks burn. The truth was, she cared for this man more than she was ready to admit, even to herself. "I would do it for what's right." Before Ezra could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching fast. Clara grabbed the rifle from above her fireplace as Ezra moved to the window. "3 riders," he reported grimly. "Patrick and 2 men I don't recognize." "It's not even dawn," Clara said. "What are they doing here so early?" The answer came in the form of Patrick's voice shouting from outside. "Ezra, come out here, little brother. We need to talk." Clara and Ezra exchanged glances. "Stay here," Ezra said, heading for the door. "Like hell," Clara replied, following him outside with the rifle in her hands. Patrick sat his horse casually, but Clara noticed that his 2 companions had their hands resting on their gun belts. These weren't lawmen, they were hired guns. "You're trespassing on my property," Clara called out. "We're here for family business, Ma'am," Patrick replied politely. "Ezra, I thought about what you said yesterday and you're right. What happened before was unfortunate, but the family wants to make it right. By taking me back to be locked up again?" Ezra asked skeptically. "By giving you a share of the family business," Patrick said smoothly. "A real partnership. You'd have your own money, your own say in how things are run." Clara saw something flicker across Ezra's face. Not temptation, but recognition. "What kind of business, Patrick?" "Import and export. We've got connections all over the territory now. It's profitable work." "Importing and exporting what?" Patrick's smile faltered slightly. "Various goods. Supply and demand. You know how it works." "I know exactly how it works," Ezra said coldly. "The same way it worked in Sarah's town." The pretense dropped from Patrick's face like a mask. "You always were too smart for your own good. Little brother, smart enough to know that you're not here to offer me a partnership. You're here because you're afraid of what I might say to the right people." One of Patrick's men shifted in his saddle, hand moving closer to his gun. Clara raised her rifle slightly and the man froze. "Now, Mrs. Whitmore," Patrick said, his voice taking on a warning tone. "There's no need for weapons. This is just a family discussion." "Any discussion involving my friend is my business," Clara replied steadily. "Your friend?" Patrick laughed. "Lady, you don't know what kind of man you're protecting. Ezra's not just crazy, he's dangerous. After Sarah died, he tried to kill me. That's why we had to have him committed." "That's a lie," Ezra said, but Clara heard the uncertainty in his voice. "Is it? Tell her about the night you came to my house with a gun, Ezra. Tell her about the threats you made." Clara saw Ezra's face go pale. I was drunk. I was grieving. I said things I didn't mean." "You put a gun to my head and swore you'd kill me if I didn't confess to killing Sarah," Patrick said coldly. "That's not grief, brother. That's madness." "Because I knew you were responsible," Ezra shouted. "I knew you had sold information to those raiders. You knew nothing. You suspected. You imagined. You let your grief drive you insane." Patrick's voice became almost gentle. "Come home with me, Ezra. Let the family take care of you like we should have from the beginning." Clara watched the play of emotions across Ezra's face. Doubt, guilt, and a terrible familiar self-loathing. She recognized it because she had felt it herself after Thomas's death. The voice that whispered that maybe everyone else was right. Maybe she was broken beyond repair. "Ezra," she said softly, "look at me." When his tortured gaze met hers, Clara saw not madness, but a man who had been systematically destroyed by the people who should have loved him most. "You are not crazy," she said firmly. "You are not dangerous, and you are not going anywhere with them." Patrick's pleasant facade finally cracked completely. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're making a serious mistake. My brother needs professional care, not the fantasies of some lonely widow." The insult hit Clara like a slap, but she didn't flinch. "Get off my property now." "We'll be back," Patrick said, gathering his reins. "With proper authority next time. Enjoy your last night of freedom, little brother." As the 3 men rode away, Clara felt Ezra sag beside her, like a man whose last hope had died. "Maybe he's right," Ezra whispered. "Maybe I am dangerous. Maybe you'd be safer if I just went with them." Clara turned to face him, her heart breaking at the defeat in his voice. "Ezra Sullivan, if you even think about leaving me to face this alone, I'll never forgive you." For the first time since his brother's arrival, Ezra smiled. "Yes, ma'am." But as they walked back into the house together, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their real troubles were just beginning. The next morning brought Dr. Thompson to Clara's door, his medical bag in hand and concern etched on his young face. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, removing his hat, "I hope you don't mind the early visit, but I heard about yesterday's encounter and wanted to check on both of you." Clara welcomed him in, grateful for any friendly face. She found Ezra in the barn, working with an intensity that spoke of a man trying to outrun his demons. "Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Thompson called out, "Might I have a word?" Ezra looked up from the harness he was repairing, wariness flickering in his eyes. "If this is about my supposed mental condition, Doctor, I assure you—" "Actually, it's about your physical condition," Dr. Thompson interrupted gently. "Those scars on your wrists and ankles need proper attention, and I suspect you haven't been eating properly for months." Clara watched as Ezra's defensive posture softened slightly. "That's thoughtful of you." As Dr. Thompson examined Ezra's wrists, cleaning and bandaging the worst of the scarring, he spoke in the calm, professional tone that had already earned him respect in Deadwood. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been a physician for 8 years. I've seen genuine mental illness, and I've seen what grief and trauma can do to a person. What I see in you is not insanity, but the natural response of a healthy mind to extraordinary cruelty." "You barely know me," Ezra protested. "I know that a truly dangerous man wouldn't have spent the last 3 weeks quietly helping a widow repair her ranch. I know that a madman wouldn't have taught the Henderson boy his numbers when he was struggling with arithmetic at the general store. And I know that an unstable person wouldn't have the kind of steady hands needed for the detailed work you've been doing here." Clara felt a rush of warmth toward the young doctor. "You've been watching him?" "I've been watching the whole situation," Dr. Thompson admitted. "Frankly, I was curious to see if the town's fears were justified. They're not." "Tell that to Patrick Sullivan," Ezra said bitterly. "I intend to, if given the opportunity." Dr. Thompson finished with the bandages and stepped back. "Mr. Sullivan, would you be willing to submit to a formal medical examination? One that I could document and present to any court that might question your mental state?" Ezra looked to Clara, who nodded encouragingly. "What would that involve?" "A series of tests. Cognitive, emotional, behavioral. Nothing invasive, but thorough enough to provide legal documentation of your mental competency." "And you'd do this for me?" "Why?" Dr. Thompson smiled. "Because I believe in justice, Mr. Sullivan, and because I've seen what Mrs. Whitmore has accomplished with you. That kind of positive change doesn't happen when someone is truly mentally ill." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Martha Collins, who rode up in her small buggy with her characteristic directness. "Thought you might want to know," Martha announced without preamble. "Patrick Sullivan's been making the rounds in town, spreading stories about his dangerous brother. He's got Sheriff Jenkins wrapped around his finger, and he's promising Brennan some kind of business partnership if he helps get Ezra removed." Clara felt her heart sink. "What kind of stories?" "Claims Ezra burned down a schoolhouse in his last town. Says he attacked several women. Pure nonsense, of course, but Jenkins is eating it up." "People believe these lies?" Dr. Thompson asked. "Some do. Others are asking questions." Martha's eyes sparkled with satisfaction. "Turns out young Billy Henderson has been telling everyone how the scary man helped him with his arithmetic and even whittled him a toy horse. Hard to maintain that someone's a dangerous lunatic when an 8-year-old boy is singing his praises." Clara saw Ezra's eyes widen in surprise. "Billy's been talking about me. That boy thinks you walk on water," Martha said with a grin. "Been asking his mother when he can visit you again to learn more numbers." For the first time in days, Clara saw genuine happiness cross Ezra's face. "I'd like that. I've missed teaching. Which brings me to my real reason for coming," Martha continued. "There's going to be a town meeting tonight. Brennan called it, ostensibly to discuss public safety concerns, but really it's a kangaroo court designed to pressure you into giving up Ezra." "Then we'll be there," Clara said firmly. "Clara, no," Ezra protested. "You don't need to subject yourself to that kind of hostility for my sake." "Yes, I do," Clara replied, and she realized that somewhere along the way her feelings for this gentle, broken man had deepened into something she wasn't ready to name. "We'll face this together." Dr. Thompson stood up, brushing dust from his coat. "Count me in as well, and I'll have those medical examination results ready by tonight." As the doctor and Martha prepared to leave, Clara found herself standing closer to Ezra than propriety strictly allowed. He seemed to realize it at the same moment she did, and for a heartbeat, the air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. "Clara," he said softly, "I need you to know something. Whatever happens tonight, whatever the town decides, you've given me the most precious gift anyone has ever given me." "What's that?" "You've made me believe I'm worth saving." Clara felt her breath catch. "Ezra." Before she could finish the thought, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Through the window, Clara could see Patrick Sullivan returning, but this time he had 6 men with him, all armed. "Time's up, little brother," Patrick called out. "Come out peacefully and Mrs. Whitmore won't get hurt." Clara grabbed her rifle, but Ezra caught her arm. "Clara, no, there are too many of them. I'm not letting them take you, and I'm not letting them hurt you." Ezra's eyes held a determination Clara had never seen before. "There has to be another way." Outside, Patrick's voice grew more threatening. I'm giving you 1 minute, Ezra, then we're coming in after you. Clara looked at the man who had become so much more than a refugee from cruelty and made a decision that surprised them both. Marry me, she said. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot. Ezra stared at Clara as if she had lost her mind. What did you just say? Marry me, Clara repeated, her voice stronger now. Right now. If we're married, you have legal protection as my husband. They can't just drag you away. Clara, that's not how marriage works. You can't just marry someone to protect them from... I can marry someone I care about, Clara interrupted, and the truth of it hit her like a revelation. Someone I've come to love. Ezra's eyes widened. Clara, you don't mean that. You're just trying to save me. I'm trying to save us both, Clara said fiercely. Don't you see? I was dying alone on this ranch, just going through the motions of living. You brought me back to life, Ezra. You made me remember what it feels like to have purpose, to have someone to care for. Outside, Patrick's voice grew more impatient. 30 seconds, Ezra. Dr. Thompson, Clara called out. Can you perform a marriage ceremony? The young physician looked stunned. Yes, actually. I'm licensed to perform civil ceremonies in the territory, but Clara, are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Clara said, still looking into Ezra's eyes. The question is, are you willing to take a chance on a stubborn widow who's probably making the biggest mistake of her life? Ezra reached out and took her hands in his. Clara, I have nothing to offer you. No money, no property, no family name worth having. I'm a broken man with more enemies than friends. You have yourself, Clara said simply. That's all I've ever wanted. Time's up, Patrick shouted from outside. Martha suddenly stepped forward. Dr. Thompson, start the ceremony. I'll be the witness. This is highly irregular, Dr. Thompson protested, but he was already reaching for his small prayer book. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Clara said without hesitation. Do you, Ezra Sullivan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Ezra looked into Clara's eyes and saw not pity or desperation, but genuine love. I do. Then by the power vested in me by Dakota territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. The ceremony was interrupted by the sound of boots on the front porch. Patrick Sullivan kicked open the door just as Dr. Thompson was closing his prayer book. Step away from my brother. Lady, Patrick snarled, his hand on his gun. I'm afraid you're too late, Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Thompson said calmly, holding up the marriage certificate he had just signed. Your brother is now a married man, and as such, he has every legal right to make his own decisions about where he lives and with whom. Patrick's face went white with rage. That's not a legal marriage. It's a sham designed to... It's perfectly legal, Martha interrupted, stepping forward with her own signed witness statement. Performed by a licensed official with proper witnesses. Your brother is free to choose his own life now. This is ridiculous, Patrick exploded. Ezra's not competent to make that decision. Actually, he is, Dr. Thompson said, producing another document from his bag. I've just completed a comprehensive mental health evaluation of Mr. Sullivan. He shows no signs of mental illness, violent tendencies, or impaired judgment. In fact, his cognitive abilities are well above average. Clara watched Patrick's face cycle through disbelief, fury, and finally calculation. She could almost see him weighing his options. This isn't over, he said finally. Marriage or no marriage, I'll find a way to prove Ezra's incompetent. You're welcome to try, Clara said, stepping closer to Ezra and taking his arm. But you'll have to go through me first. Patrick's eyes narrowed as he looked at the small group standing united against him. You have no idea what you're protecting, Mrs. Ann Sullivan. My brother isn't just crazy, he's dangerous, and when he finally snaps, your blood will be on his hands. With that ominous pronouncement, Patrick stormed out, his men following behind. As soon as they were gone, Clara felt her knees go weak. The magnitude of what she had just done, marrying a man she had known for less than a month, suddenly hit her. Clara, Ezra said softly, are you all right? She looked up at her new husband and felt an odd mix of terror and exhilaration. Ask me tomorrow. Martha clapped her hands together with satisfaction. Well, that was the most exciting wedding I've ever attended. Short on romance, perhaps, but long on drama. Martha's right, Dr. Thompson said, putting away his papers. You should know that this marriage, however quickly arranged, is legally binding. Are you both prepared for what that means? Clara and Ezra looked at each other with the sudden realization that they were now husband and wife, bound together by law and circumstance, but not yet by choice born of courtship and time. I suppose we'll figure it out as we go, Clara said finally. Together, Ezra added, and despite everything, Clara felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, Her impulsive decision might turn out to be the best thing she had ever done. But as she watched Patrick Sullivan ride away, she couldn't shake the feeling that their real troubles were just beginning. The news of Clara and Ezra's sudden marriage spread through Deadwood like wildfire, dividing the already fractured community even further. Some saw it as a romantic tale of two lonely souls finding solace in each other, while others viewed it as proof that Clara had lost her mind and Ezra had manipulated her into protecting him. The town meeting that evening was standing room only. Clara sat in the front row with Ezra beside her, their hands clasped together in a show of unity that fooled no one about their nervousness. Behind them sat Martha, Dr. Thompson, and a handful of other supporters, including the Henderson family and several other families whose children Ezra had quietly helped with their studies. Silas Brennan called the meeting to order with the gravity of a judge pronouncing sentence. "We're here tonight to discuss a matter of public safety that affects every family in Deadwood. Are we here to discuss safety or to put two decent people on trial?" Martha called out from her seat. "Mrs. Collins, you'll have your chance to speak," Brennan replied coldly. "But first, I think we should hear from someone who knows the accused better than anyone else." Patrick Sullivan rose from his seat near the back of the room, his face a mask of sorrowful concern. "Friends, it pains me to speak against my own brother, but I feel I have a duty to this community." Clara felt Ezra tense beside her, but he remained silent. "My brother Ezra is a sick man," Patrick continued. "After his wife's tragic death, he began drinking heavily, getting into violent fights, making wild accusations against innocent people. My family tried to help him, but he became increasingly dangerous." "So dangerous that you sold him to a circus?" Dr. Thompson called out. Patrick's expression didn't waver. "We had him committed to what we believed was a medical facility. We were deceived by unscrupulous men who took advantage of our desperation to help Ezra." The lie was so smoothly told that Clara could see some people in the crowd nodding sympathetically. "And now," Patrick went on, "this poor woman has been deceived as well. In his lucid moments, Ezra can be charming, even scholarly, but I've seen what happens when the madness takes him. I've seen the violence he's capable of." "What violence?" Clara stood up, her voice ringing through the hall. "In the month Ezra has been living on my ranch, he has shown nothing but gentleness and kindness. He's helped repair my property, taught children their letters and numbers, and treated me with more respect than some so-called civilized men in this very room." "Mrs. Sullivan," Brennan said, emphasizing her new married name with obvious skepticism, "with all due respect, you've only known this man for a few weeks. His own family has known him for 30 years. The same family that sold him into slavery." Clara shot back. "I'd say their judgment is somewhat questionable." Reverend Patterson rose from his seat, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. "Mrs. Sullivan, while we admire your Christian charity, we must ask whether you've considered the spiritual implications of what you've done. Marriage is a sacred institution, not a legal convenience." "My marriage is no one's business but mine and my husband's," Clara replied firmly. "It becomes everyone's business when public safety is at stake," Sheriff Jenkins interjected. "Mrs. Sullivan, I have to ask, did your husband tell you about the fire?" Clara felt ice form in her stomach. "What fire?" Patrick stepped forward again, his face a picture of reluctant revelation. "The schoolhouse where Ezra taught, it burned down 3 days after Sarah's funeral. No one could prove anything, but Ezra had been seen there that night, and he'd been making threats about burning down everything that reminded him of her." Clara turned to look at Ezra, whose face had gone deathly pale. "Ezra? I was drunk," Ezra said quietly. "I went to the schoolhouse because Sarah and I had planned to meet there the day she died. I wanted to feel close to her, but I would never have burned it down. Never. The fire started in the room where Sarah taught," Patrick continued remorselessly. "And Ezra's lantern was found in the ashes." "That doesn't prove anything," Dr. Thompson protested. "It proves enough," Brennan declared. "This man is clearly unstable, and this marriage is obviously a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of his actions." The crowd was murmuring now, and Clara could feel the tide of opinion turning against them. She stood up again, her heart pounding. "Let me tell you what I know about my husband," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "I know that he worked from dawn to dusk, repairing my ranch without being asked. I know that he taught the Henderson boy to read when no one else had time for him. I know that he's gentle with animals, patient with children, and has never once raised his voice to me, even when I've been stubborn and difficult." She turned to face Patrick directly. "And I know that a man who would sell his own brother to a traveling circus is not someone whose word should be trusted about anything." "The woman's been bewitched," someone called out from the back. "She's been manipulated by a madman," another voice agreed. "Enough!" Martha Collins stood up, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. "I've listened to enough lies and gossip for one evening. Mr. Sullivan, would you mind telling us what really happened to your wife?" Ezra rose slowly, his face pale but determined. "Sarah was killed when raiders attacked our town. They knew exactly where to find the money, exactly which families to target. It wasn't random violence, it was an organized robbery." "And you think your family was involved?" Dr. Thompson prompted gently. "I know they were," Ezra said, his voice growing stronger. "I found maps in Patrick's handwriting, letters arranging meetings with known criminals. My family sold information about Sarah's town to a gang of outlaws." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but Patrick's voice rose above them all. "See how his mind works," Patrick called out. "Sarah dies in a tragic raid, and rather than accept it, he creates elaborate conspiracy theories involving his own family. This is exactly the kind of delusion that makes him dangerous." "Then explain the maps," Ezra challenged. "What maps? You've never shown anyone these supposed maps, because they don't exist except in your troubled mind." Clara watched her husband's face crumble as he realized he had no proof. Nothing but his word against his brother's. The crowd sensed his uncertainty and began to turn against him again. That's when 8-year-old Billy Henderson did something that surprised everyone. He stood up on his chair and shouted at the top of his voice, "Mr. Ezra's not crazy. He's the nicest man in the whole world, and he taught me how to carve a horse." The room fell silent as the boy's mother tried to pull him back down, but Billy wasn't finished. "He knows everything about numbers and reading and geography, and he said someday he'd show me where Ireland is on a map. Crazy people can't do that." The simple faith in the child's voice seemed to cut through all the adult suspicions and fears. Clara saw several faces in the crowd soften, and she realized that this might be their one chance to turn the tide. "My husband is not crazy," she said, standing once more. "He's a man who has been broken by grief and betrayal, but who is healing. And I have faith that given time and support from this community, he'll prove that the best judge of a man's character is not his past, but his actions in the present." The room was quiet now, weighing her words. Finally, Brennan spoke. "All very touching, Mrs. Sullivan, but faith doesn't trump facts. And the fact is, we have only your word that this man is safe." "No, Doctor," Thompson said, standing and holding up his medical evaluation. "You have my professional opinion as well, and I'm willing to stake my reputation on it." "As am I," Martha added. Slowly, one by one, other voices joined them. The Henderson family, the young couple who ran the bakery, even the elderly widow who lived above the post office. But Clara could see that the room was still divided. Some faces showed support, others remained skeptical or hostile. The vote, when it came, would be close, too close. That's when the door at the back of the hall burst open, and a man Clara didn't recognize strode in, his federal marshal's badge glinting in the lamplight. "Mr. Patrick Sullivan," the marshal called out, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, robbery, and accessory to murder." The room exploded in shocked voices as Patrick went white as a sheet. "This is ridiculous. On what evidence?" The marshal smiled grimly. "On the evidence provided by your brother Michael, who's been singing like a canary in the territorial jail. Seems he had a crisis of conscience about all those people who died because of information your family sold to raiders." Clara felt Ezra sag with relief beside her as the truth finally came to light, but she also knew that this vindication, while sweet, had come at a terrible cost. The divide in their community would take time to heal, and she and Ezra would have to prove themselves worthy of trust every single day. As Patrick was led away in shackles, Clara took her husband's hand and squeezed it gently. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The arrest of Patrick Sullivan sent shockwaves through Deadwood that lasted for weeks. Federal marshals descended on the town to investigate the full extent of the Sullivan family's criminal enterprise, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. Patrick and his brother Michael had been providing intelligence to a network of raiders who had terrorized small communities across 3 territories. Sarah's town had been just one of many that had fallen victim to their betrayal. For Ezra, vindication brought no joy, only a hollow satisfaction that justice had finally been served for his beloved Sarah. Clara watched her husband struggle with the complex emotions of seeing his family's crimes exposed, even as their revelation freed him from years of false accusations and self-doubt. "I should feel triumphant," Ezra confided to Clara one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the Dakota hills. "Instead, I just feel empty." "You feel grief," Clara said gently. "You're mourning the family you thought you had, the brother you loved before you knew what he really was." "How do you always know exactly what I'm thinking?" Clara smiled sadly. Because I've been where you are. When Thomas died, I didn't just lose my husband. I lost the future I thought we were going to have together. Sometimes the death of a dream hurts as much as the death of a person. They sat in comfortable silence, their hands clasped together in the growing twilight. Their marriage, born of desperation and necessity, had slowly begun to transform into something deeper and more genuine. They had started sleeping in separate rooms out of propriety, but they spent their days working side by side, sharing meals and conversations and the small intimacies that married couples take for granted. "Clara," Ezra said suddenly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, always. Do you regret marrying me? I know it wasn't what you dreamed of when you were young, a rushed ceremony to save a stranger from his own family." Clara turned to look at her husband, noting the way the fading light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the gentle lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter as well as sorrow. "Do you want to know what I dreamed of when I was young? Tell me." "I dreamed of marrying a kind man who would talk to me like I had a brain in my head. Someone who would work beside me to build something worthwhile, who would be gentle with children and loyal to his friends." She paused, smiling. "I dreamed of a man who would love me for who I am, not who he wanted me to be. And do you think, could you ever love a man like that? If he happened to love you more than his own life?" Clara's breath caught as she realized what he was asking. "Ezra, I know this marriage started as a legal convenience," he rushed on. "But Clara, you've become everything to me. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live again. I love you with everything I have, and if you could find it in your heart to—" Clara silenced him by leaning over and kissing him softly. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with tears. "Are you foolish, man?" she whispered. "I've been in love with you for weeks. I was just waiting for you to catch up." That night, for the first time since their wedding, Clara and Ezra shared not just a home, but a marriage bed. They came together with the tender passion of two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption and hope for the future. Their happiness, however, was threatened by news that arrived with the morning mail. Sheriff Jenkins appeared at their door with a grim expression and an official-looking document in his hand. "Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Sullivan," he said formally, "I'm afraid I have some difficult news. There's been a challenge to your marriage." Clara felt her blood turn to ice. "What kind of challenge?" "Silas Brennan has filed a petition with the territorial court, claiming that the marriage is invalid due to undue influence and mental incompetence." "That's ridiculous," Clara said angrily. "Dr. Thompson certified that Ezra is mentally competent." "I know, ma'am, and I suspect this petition won't hold up in court. But until it's resolved, there's going to be a cloud over your legal status." Ezra stepped forward. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that technically your marriage could be dissolved, and Mr. Sullivan could still be vulnerable to commitment proceedings." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Just when they had found happiness together, Brennan was trying to tear it away from them. "There's more," Sheriff Jenkins continued reluctantly. "Brennan's claiming that he has new evidence of Mr. Sullivan's instability." "What evidence?" Clara demanded. "He says he has witnesses who saw Mr. Sullivan acting inappropriately with local women." Clara felt rage flood through her. "That's a lie, and everyone knows it." "Ma'am, I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just telling you what's been filed with the court." After the sheriff left, Clara and Ezra sat at their kitchen table, staring at the official documents with growing despair. "He's not going to give up," Ezra said quietly. "Brennan wants your land, and he'll destroy both of us to get it." "Then we'll fight him," Clara said fiercely. "We'll get lawyers, we'll find witnesses. Clara, stop!" Ezra reached across the table and took her hands. "Look at what this is costing you. Your reputation, your peace of mind, your standing in the community. Maybe it would be better if I just—" "Don't you dare," Clara interrupted. "Don't you dare think about leaving me now. We're stronger together than we are apart. And I'm not giving up on us. Even if it means losing everything else." Clara looked into her husband's worried eyes and felt a fierce protectiveness rise up in her chest. "Ezra Sullivan, you are not everything else. You are everything, period. And I'll be damned if I let Silas Brennan or anyone else take you away from me." That evening, as they prepared for bed, Clara noticed Ezra standing at the window, staring out into the darkness. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "I'm thinking about Sarah," he said quietly, "about how she would have handled all this." Clara felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, but she pushed it down. "Tell me about her." "She was fearless," Ezra said with a smile. "When the school board tried to fire her for teaching mathematics to girls, she marched into their meeting and gave them a lecture about the intellectual capabilities of women that left them speechless. She never backed down from a fight if she believed she was right." "She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have loved you," Ezra said, turning to face Clara. "She would have said you had the heart of a warrior. Is that what you think?" "I think," Ezra said, pulling her into his arms, "that I'm the luckiest man alive to have two such extraordinary women love me in one lifetime." As they held each other in the lamplight, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges Brennan could devise, she and Ezra would face them together. Their love had been born in adversity, tempered by struggle, and strengthened by trust. It would not be easily broken. But as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest test was yet to come. The territorial courthouse in Rapid City was packed to capacity on the morning of Clara and Ezra's hearing. News of the case had spread throughout the region, drawing spectators, journalists, and curiosity seekers from as far away as Cheyenne. The question of whether a marriage could be invalidated based on claims of mental incompetence had legal implications that extended far beyond one couple's personal struggles. Clara sat beside Ezra at the defendant's table, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes boring into their backs. She wore her best dress, the dark blue one she had married Thomas in all those years ago, while Ezra had borrowed a proper suit from Dr. Thompson. They looked, Clara thought, like exactly what they were, decent people trying to defend their right to be together. Across the aisle, Silas Brennan sat with his expensive lawyer from Denver, a thin man with cold eyes who had made his reputation destroying marriages and reputations for profit. Behind them sat a handful of Deadwood residents who had aligned themselves with Brennan's cause, including some Clara had once considered friends. The judge, a stern-faced man named Samuel Crawford, called the court to order and addressed the room with the gravity the case deserved. "We are here today to determine the validity of the marriage between Clara Whitmore Sullivan and Ezra Sullivan, and to assess claims that said marriage was entered into under duress and that Mr. Sullivan lacks the mental capacity for such a legal commitment." Brennan's lawyer, Mr. Ashford, rose to present his case first. He painted a picture of Clara as a vulnerable widow taken advantage of by a dangerous madman, and of Ezra as a manipulative predator who had used his education and charm to ensnare an innocent woman. "Your Honor," Ashford declared, "the evidence will show that Ezra Sullivan is a man of violent tendencies who has been rejected by his own family due to his unstable mental condition. He burned down a schoolhouse in his previous town, threatened multiple citizens with physical harm, and coerced Mrs. Whitmore into marriage through emotional manipulation and implied threats." Clara felt Ezra tense beside her as the lies poured forth, but their own lawyer, a young man named David Morrison, who had volunteered to take their case, placed a restraining hand on his arm. Ashford called his first witness, a man Clara didn't recognize who claimed to have known Ezra in his previous town. The man testified that Ezra had been wild-eyed and dangerous after his wife's death, that he had made threats against innocent people and had been seen near the schoolhouse on the night it burned. "And in your opinion," Ashford asked, "was Mr. Sullivan mentally competent at that time?" "No, sir," the witness replied. "He was clearly mad with grief and rage, not fit to be around decent folks." Morrison's cross-examination revealed that the witness had been paid $50 by Brennan to travel to Rapid City, and that he had been drunk for most of the period he claimed to have observed Ezra. But the damage was done. Doubt had been planted in the judge's mind. Brennan himself took the stand next, presenting himself as a concerned citizen who had tried to help Clara see reason. "Your Honor, I've known Mrs. Whitmore for years. She's always been a sensible, practical woman, but after her husband's death, she became isolated, vulnerable. When this stranger arrived in our community, I watched her change completely. She stopped thinking rationally, spent her life savings on a whim, and entered into a marriage that any sane person could see was a mistake." "And what, in your opinion, motivated this change?" Ashford prompted. "I believe she was lonely and desperate, and Mr. Sullivan took advantage of that desperation. He's educated enough to be persuasive, but that doesn't make him sane." Morrison's cross-examination was more effective this time. He forced Brennan to admit his interest in purchasing Clara's land, his business dealings with Patrick Sullivan, and his role in spreading malicious gossip about Ezra throughout the community. "So your concern for Mrs. Sullivan's welfare is entirely altruistic?" Morrison asked sarcastically. "Of course," Brennan replied, but his credibility was clearly damaged. The morning session ended with testimony from several Deadwood residents who spoke against Ezra, painting him as a dangerous outsider who had disrupted their peaceful community. Clara's heart sank as she listened to people she had known for years describe her husband as a threat to public safety. During the lunch recess, Clara and Ezra walked silently through the streets of Rapid City, neither wanting to discuss what they had heard. "It's not going well," Ezra said finally. "It's not over yet," Clara replied, but she could hear the doubt in her own voice. The afternoon session began with Morrison calling his witnesses. Dr. Thompson took the stand first, his medical evaluation of Ezra in hand. "Dr. Thompson," Morrison began, "in your professional opinion, is Mr. Sullivan mentally competent?" "Absolutely," Dr. Thompson replied firmly. "I conducted extensive tests of his cognitive abilities, emotional stability, and social functioning. Mr. Sullivan shows no signs of mental illness, violent tendencies, or impaired judgment. In fact, his intellectual capacity is well above average. And what about his behavior in your community? Have you observed anything that would suggest instability?" "Quite the opposite. I've watched Mr. Sullivan demonstrate patience, kindness, and remarkable self-control under circumstances that would challenge anyone. He's worked tirelessly to contribute to the community, helped local children with their education, and shown nothing but devotion to his wife." Ashford's cross-examination focused on the brevity of Dr. Thompson's acquaintance with Ezra, but the doctor held firm in his professional assessment. Martha Collins took the stand next, her testimony a passionate defense of both Clara and Ezra. "Judge Crawford," she said, looking directly at the bench, "I've run a business in Deadwood for 15 years. I've seen every kind of man there is, good ones, bad ones, and everything in between. Ezra Sullivan is one of the good ones. He's gentle, intelligent, and completely devoted to Clara. Their marriage might have started under unusual circumstances, but it's grown into something real and beautiful." "And you have no concerns about Mr. Sullivan's mental state?" Morrison asked. "None whatsoever. If anything, I'm concerned about the mental state of people who would try to destroy a loving marriage for their own selfish purposes." The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Billy Henderson, the 8-year-old boy Ezra had helped with his arithmetic, was called to the stand. The judge looked skeptical about hearing from such a young witness, but Morrison persisted. "Billy," Morrison said gently, "can you tell the judge about Mr. Sullivan?" "He's the nicest man I ever met," Billy said in his clear child's voice. "He taught me my numbers and how to carve animals out of wood. He never yelled at me, not even when I got the problems wrong. My pa says mean people can't be patient with children, so Mr. Sullivan must be real nice." "Are you afraid of Mr. Sullivan?" "No, sir. I wish he could be my teacher at school. He knows everything about everything." Ashford declined to cross-examine the child, clearly recognizing that attacking an 8-year-old would damage his case more than help it. Finally, Clara and Ezra testified on their own behalf. Clara spoke passionately about her love for her husband, the way he had brought joy back into her life, and her absolute certainty that their marriage was valid and true. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "I am not a foolish woman or a victim. I am a grown woman who chose to marry a good man who loves me. The fact that our courtship was brief doesn't make our feelings any less real or our commitment any less serious." Ezra's testimony was quieter, but equally compelling. He spoke about his grief over Sarah's death, his gratitude for Clara's kindness, and his determination to build a life worthy of the second chance he had been given. "I know I'm not perfect, Your Honor," he said. "I've made mistakes, felt anger and despair, struggled with loss like any human being would. But I am not insane and I am not dangerous. I'm simply a man who wants to love his wife and contribute to his community in peace." As the day's testimony concluded, Judge Crawford announced that he would render his decision the following morning. Clara and Ezra returned to their hotel room in anxious silence, both acutely aware that their entire future hung in the balance. That night, as they lay in each other's arms, Clara whispered the question that had been haunting her all day. "What if we lose? What if he declares the marriage invalid?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Then we'll find another way to be together. We'll go somewhere new, start over, build a life where no one knows our history. You'd do that, leave everything behind again?" "Clara," Ezra said, turning to face her in the darkness, "you are my everything. Home isn't a place, it's wherever you are." As dawn broke over Rapid City, Clara and Ezra prepared to learn their fate, clinging to each other and to the hope that love would triumph over prejudice and greed. The courthouse was even more crowded than the day before as Judge Crawford prepared to deliver his verdict. Clara sat between Ezra and their lawyer, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. The judge's stern face revealed nothing as he shuffled through his papers and cleared his throat. This case has required me to consider not just the law, but the fundamental nature of marriage, mental competency, and the rights of individuals to determine their own destiny, Judge Crawford began. I have weighed the testimony carefully, examined the evidence, and considered the broader implications of my decision. Clara felt Ezra's hand slip into hers, and she drew strength from his steady presence beside her. The petitioner, Mr. Brennan, has asked this court to invalidate a marriage on the grounds that one party lacks the mental capacity for such a commitment and that the union was entered into under duress. These are serious allegations that strike at the heart of personal liberty and the sanctity of marriage. The judge paused to look directly at Clara and Ezra. However, after careful consideration of all the evidence presented, I find that the petitioner has failed to prove his case. Clara felt her heart leap. But Judge Crawford wasn't finished. Dr. Thompson's medical evaluation clearly establishes Mr. Sullivan's mental competency. Multiple witnesses have testified to his good character, his positive contributions to the community, and his loving treatment of his wife. The allegations of violence and instability appear to be based on malicious gossip rather than credible evidence. Brennan's face had gone red with anger, while his lawyer sat stone-faced, clearly recognizing defeat. Furthermore, the judge continued, I find the circumstances surrounding this petition deeply troubling. It appears that Mr. Brennan's concerns about Mrs. Sullivan's welfare are motivated more by his own financial interests than by genuine care for her well-being. The court will not be a party to such manipulation. Judge Crawford's voice grew stronger, more decisive. The marriage between Clara Whitmore Sullivan and Ezra Sullivan is hereby declared valid and legally binding. Mr. Sullivan is found to be mentally competent and fully capable of making his own decisions regarding his life and relationships. The courtroom erupted in cheers from the Sullivan supporters. While Clara felt tears of relief streaming down her face, Ezra pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as the reality of their victory sank in. But Judge Crawford wasn't finished. He banged his gavel for order and continued with an unexpected addition to his ruling. Mr. Brennan, I find your conduct in this matter to be reprehensible. You have wasted this court's time with frivolous allegations, attempted to destroy a valid marriage for personal gain, and shown a callous disregard for the welfare of your neighbors. I am hereby ordering you to pay all court costs for these proceedings, as well as a fine of $500 for filing a malicious lawsuit. Brennan leaped to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I demand... Mr. Brennan, you are in no position to demand anything. If you continue to harass Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I will hold you in contempt of court. This case is closed. As they left the courthouse, Clara and Ezra were surrounded by well-wishers from Deadwood who had made the journey to support them. Martha Collins enveloped Clara in a bear hug, while Dr. Thompson shook Ezra's hand with obvious satisfaction. I knew justice would prevail, Martha said with tears in her eyes. Now let's get you two home where you belong. The journey back to Deadwood was triumphant, with their supporters singing songs and sharing stories as their wagon train wound through the Dakota hills. But for Clara, the sweetest moment came when they finally reached their own ranch and stood together on the porch where their relationship had truly begun. We did it, she said softly, still hardly believing it was over. We did it, Ezra agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the sun set over their land. In the months that followed, Clara and Ezra's marriage continued to strengthen and deepen. Ezra established a small school on their ranch, teaching not just children, but adults who had never learned to read and write. Clara expanded her gardens and started a small business selling vegetables and preserves to the growing population of Deadwood. Silas Brennan, ruined by the court costs and fine, sold his store and left town in disgrace. His property was purchased by a consortium of local residents, including Martha Collins, who turned it into a community center where Ezra held evening classes for adults. The biggest surprise came 6 months after the trial, when Dr. Thompson arrived at the ranch with an enormous grin and an announcement that left Clara speechless. Mrs. Sullivan, he said formally, I have the honor to inform you that you're going to be a mother. Clara stared at him in shock before turning to Ezra, who looked equally stunned. Are you certain? Quite certain. You're about 2 months along, which means the baby should arrive sometime in early spring. That evening, Clara and Ezra sat on their porch, as they had so many times before, but now with their hands resting on Clara's still flat belly, marveling at the miracle of new life growing within her. Thomas and I tried for years to have children, Clara confided. I had given up hope. Sarah wanted children too, Ezra said softly. She used to say that teaching other people's children was practice for raising our own someday. Do you think she would approve of this baby? Ezra was quiet for a moment, considering. I think Sarah would want me to be happy, and I think she would love you for bringing me back to life. And I think Thomas would want me to grab hold of happiness with both hands and never let go," Clara replied. As winter gave way to spring, Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly. The entire community rallied around the expectant couple, with Martha organizing a baby shower that brought gifts from families throughout the region. Even some of the people who had initially opposed their marriage came forward to congratulate them and welcome them fully into the community. On a warm April morning, with Dr. Thompson in attendance and Martha holding her hand, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby girl. As she placed the tiny, perfect child in Ezra's arms, Clara felt her heart swell with a joy so profound it took her breath away. "What should we name her?" Ezra asked, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed down at his daughter. "Hope," Clara said without hesitation. "Her name is Hope." 2 years later, Clara stood in the doorway of their expanded ranch house, watching Ezra teach a group of children under the shade of the oak tree they had planted to commemorate Hope's birth. Their daughter toddled among the students, her bright laughter mixing with the voices reciting their lessons. The man who had arrived in Deadwood as a broken prisoner in a circus cage was now the most respected teacher in 3 counties. The woman who had lived in isolation and grief had become the heart of a thriving community. Together, they had built not just a marriage, but a legacy of love, learning, and second chances. That evening, as they tucked Hope into her crib and prepared for bed, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Ezra as they settled into their own bed. "Spending all your savings on a stranger?" Ezra smiled and pulled her close. "Clara Sullivan, you didn't buy my freedom that day. You bought our future, and it was the best investment either of us ever made." As they drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the sounds of the prairie night and the soft breathing of their sleeping daughter, Clara whispered a prayer of gratitude for the day she had decided to look beyond the bars of a cage and see the man within. Their love story had begun with an act of faith and had grown into something beautiful and lasting, proof that sometimes the greatest risks yield the greatest rewards. The former widow and the former prisoner had found in each other not just love, but redemption, purpose, and the kind of happiness that transforms not just 2 lives, but an entire community. And as the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Dakota sky, their story continued to unfold, one day of joy and love at a time.